refer to as a practical classic. That is a car that has that style and good looks that we all like, but is modern and dependable enough that we can drive it to the grocery store and back, or take it on a cruise night, get there and back with reasonable assurance that it will work and as few embarrassing moments as possible. A lot of this is predicated on a trip I made with my stag about 2 years ago, and you know, there's a heck of a big difference between living with your car for an hour at a time every couple of weeks to living with your car straight for 4 or 5 days. Its shortcomings come right to the top very quickly, and they're the kinds of things that start to drive you crazy. So with that in mind, then I try to put together a list of some simple improvements that you can do within the envelope of the vehicle without changing its character too much, but at the same time can eliminate its quirks and make it a little bit easier to live with. So one of the first items that's very easy to deal with is lighting. The standard seal beam on a car is 45-50 watts. Could they spare it? This throws a puddle of yellow light in front of the car somewhere. Basically, the lighting walls in the U.S. are just above acetylene lamps. European lights, however, are very much better. Their lighting walls are far more advanced than ours have ever been, and they continue to make improvements while we just sort of slog along. But at any rate, standard seal beam, not a really good design. It's really old technology. It has been around since probably the 30s. Pretty much unchanged. And the light output is kind of yellow for us people who are getting older. That yellow light just doesn't light up enough. Similarly with incandescent lamps, these darken over time because of the way they work. You've got a hot filament in there, and it's actually spraying off molecules, and eventually it coats the inside of the lens and makes it darker until it just stops working. So if you ever notice one that's burned out, you look at it, it's all black inside. Somebody said that's because it sucked in all the dark. But what that actually is the metal from the filament has coated the inside of the bulb. So a couple of quick, very simple upgrades would be going to a halogen H4 headlight. Now, our government doesn't like these lights because they're not sealed. But once I've spent the money on the housing, there's the upgrade right there, and that's $12. I can go up to 100 watts on high beam. I can go up high enough to melt the harness in the car if I wanted to. Okay, so for $12, I can improve my lights, and you know, Hella makes these lamps, and they actually are available from a lot of auto parts houses will carry. By the way, before we go much further, just because I commented some particular supplier doesn't necessarily mean endorsement. They just happen to be stuff we've used or stuff that's available, but there are any number of specialist suppliers that can make these things available. So at any rate, like I said, our government doesn't like these because they're not sealed, but they do make a tremendous improvement. They are very easy to fit, and I don't have to throw away the light to just make a simple upgrade to improve the light output. Quartz halogen lamps burn a lot hotter. They produce a light which is far more white, and they do put the light where you need it because the internal housing are produced such that you have a very sharp cutoff at the top and a nice spray of light out to the side. So it lights up the side of the road very nicely, and you get a sharp cutoff in front of the car so you're not blinding everybody in front of you. Another upgrade is xenon lamps. You see these on a lot of tuner cars today. They're very bright, almost blue. You can do those. Similar form factor. They generally require special drivers and a wire harness to operate them. But you'd be told they kind of dazzle oncoming drivers, and I wouldn't recommend them. As far as replacing things like the incandescent bulb, they make LEDs now for in pretty much any form factor for any application, from dash lights, stop lights, turn signals, marker lights, anything you want. The great thing about these is they have almost no power consumption, so they don't really add to the background load of the car. And they light up brighter and very quickly. So if you're following a car that has LED taillights, you can tell because they come on instantly, and they're brilliant. I was impressed one time. I replaced a marker light in a Triumph with a complete kit from Lucas, and the soft, gentle orange glow that came out of the brand new bulb was like, why did they bother? These will produce a very strong, bright light that's easy to see. So when you've got some distracted, emotionally challenged teenage girl following you, if she's busy on her cell phone, maybe that extra 1/10 of a second will buy you the time she needs to keep from driving into your car.
Hey, Mike?
Yes?
Can I interrupt?
Yep.
It's my place, so I can.
Yeah.
Hey, why don't you go over the relay situation, the flasher relay situation when you put
Oh, yes,
those
thank you,
LEDs
thank
on
you.
there? Sorry.
No, it's fine, it actually was on the paper. One of the things that you might have to do is when you fit the LEDs for turn signals, you either have to do one of two things. You either have to keep, like for example, the fronts as a regular incandescent bulb, or if you change all four, you have to convert it to an electronic flasher, because the LED doesn't produce enough load for the thermal flasher to operate. So the lights will just come on and stay on. So you will have to change flasher as far as that goes. But again, that's a minor item.
And it's going to be negative ground only from what I heard?
Yeah, I would imagine it would have to be, because LEDs are polarity sensitive.
Although that guy in Texas makes positive ground.
Yeah, you just
He
turn it off.
lights
Go the other
up,
way.
that place offers you either. Mike, what about the draw of the halogen lamps?
like I said, halogen right out of the box. I can buy a sealed beam halogen that is 5560, and the replaceable H4 lamp, I don't have that data, comes in many different varieties, up to 100. So it's like 65, 100, 65, 80. I think those are like the general groupings. There's a company nearby here.
At what point are you going to be going to relays?
I would expect if you went over 85 on the high beam, you'd probably want to go with the relays. Also, one drawback with the H4 lamp, just to finish it up, as you go to the higher wattages, their operational life becomes less. So for the 100-watt lamp, they're making noises about 500 hours. But when you consider that that's high beam, and they're only on for a moment, a minute or two at a time, that 500 hours could still last you a couple of years. Okay, tires. Most of our cars came out of the factory originally with bi-ply tires, or a very simple radial tire, a cheap little OEM tire. They tended to be kind of skinny. Bi-ply tires certainly didn't have the grip of a modern radial. And now today, bi-splies are certainly limited availability, mostly for the electric car market. You certainly couldn't go down to NTB and buy a set of bi-sply tires if the guy even knew what you were talking about. So you can upgrade with either a radial bi-sply look-alike. So I can get it looks like a bi-sply tire, it has that nice square shoulder on it, but it's actually radial construction. Or I can just upgrade to a modern radial tire. And you play around with the aspect ratios a little bit. You can get a tire that has about the same height as the one that came off the car, but a little more section width, gets you a little more grip. As with any radial, you need improvements in handling, improvements in ride, and generally they also come with a higher speed range and generally a mileage improvement as well. As a note, I don't know what's changed in the tire manufacturing industry in the last two decades, but they strongly recommend you replace a set of tires every 10 years, whether you use them or not. So if you buy a new tire today, number one, it's going to have a date code on it, what day it was born, or it would be month and year it was born, stamped on one sidewall. And if you buy a new set of tires, maybe you might want to check on that to make sure they didn't tell you something that's been sitting in the rafters for 6 years. But they always do recommend you get rid of them in 10 years because they do certainly dry out, but I guess there's something to do with the materials they use in the tire. They just simply break down with age. Okay, brakes. For standard duty, for street duty, a standard set of brakes is gonna get the job done. As long as everything is up to speed, you know, you've got decent set of pads, the hoses are all in good shape, the rotors are clean and running true. The standard out of the factory brakes will get the job done. But certainly there's always some room for improvements, and you know, with the way brakes work in modern cars today, it'd be terrible if the Honda Accord in front of you became your backstop. You ran into him trying to stop. So anything you can do to improve the brakes certainly will work better. Original pads can tend to be a little bit dusty. They're made for a general sort of work. So if you're being particularly aggressive on a back road, you might find pretty quickly that your brakes are starting to fade. And brakes fade because they start to overheat. What actually happens is they're outgassing a superheated gas, which creates a very thin layer, only a few molecules thick, of superheated air between the pad and the rotor. So the rotor doesn't actually get hit with the pad. You have a thin layer of air that's preventing that happening. So that's why the brake pedal still feels hard, but the car doesn't want to slow down. So modern brakes, or an upgraded set of brakes, would use something like a pad that can tolerate a higher heat range. And you can go to rotors that are vented, cross-drilled, and slotted. And the idea of the venting, obviously, is to get the heat out. The cross-drilling and slotting lets the superheated gases get out of the way, so they've got a path to push away, and now the pad can go down and get to the rotor. You can also get upgraded brake pads. EBC is one of them. They make, there's green stuff, red stuff, yellow stuff, and there might be one more. But as you keep going up, the cost increases in a similar fashion. And you might end up with a brake that doesn't work very well when it's cold. So out of the box, the EBC green stuff is slightly better than stock. I had a set on my Mini hoping to get some real brakes on the Mini, and it turned out they didn't perform quite the way I was expecting. It was slightly better than stock, but that was about it. EBC red stuff is advertised as a 25% improvement in braking efficiency. So if you went up to that color, you might notice some improvement in braking. Beyond that, you can go to the Willwood brakes, which are 2 or 4 slot, or 4 piston calipers rather. And you can always upgrade hoses to a stainless steel braid. The idea there is that it reduces the flexing. The hose tends to bulge when you push on the pedal and put pressure in the system. The stainless steel braiding prevents that doing that and keeps a nice firm pedal. Steering. Certainly cars like the TR3 have a fairly complicated steering mechanism. There's all kinds of drag links and connections and idlers and pivot points, all given to service issues. They seize with age. I don't know how many cars we've changed parts on that where turning the wheel can't be this stiff. The car is almost undrivable. And you take it apart and you find there's an idler in there that had never been lubricated and it's just about frozen solid. Newer cars obviously use rack and pinion steering, which reduces the amount of parts that you're dealing with, and they're a little bit simpler setup. Some of the upgrades, that we actually had an inquiry a couple of weeks ago about fitting power steering to the TR3. So, I mean, we thought about the problem. It's like, well, all you need is a rack that would fit within the space, and all the other parts you just bolt on. So once you figured out the configuration, you could get the parts you needed. It would actually work pretty well. As long as the customer was willing to pay for the engineering, which would take to get it all sorted out, it could be done. But,
And Mike, somebody already did that. They already engineered it.
oh, great. Okay, keep that in mind, Matt.
You can buy it ready to go.
Power rack for a 3.
Oh, TR3 electric steering?
Yeah,
I don't know
power
if it's
steering.
electric. I'm not sure it's electric, but it's rack and
Oh,
pinion.
hydraulic.
Oh, yeah, they've been selling a TR3 conversion for a long time now.
Okay, but you want an electric. Is that
The
what you're-
customer wants electric.
Okay.
Let's
Anyway.
separate.
I got an answer for that.
Okay.
It's called Audi.
Okay, anyway, you can make some improvements to that. If you just want to upgrade it, there obviously are a rack and pinion kit you can fit into a TR3. We've seen a few of them here. And you can, and beyond that, you can go to a quicker ratio for like a TR6, for example. Also, a smaller steering wheel might give you a little bit more feel. The early cars, 70, 71, 72, all had a big 15-inch black wheel. But if you went to the wheel that came in 74, 75, it was 1 inch smaller, a little bit more section to get a hold of, and a tad more comfortable. And that's an upgrade you can make, and nobody would ever know that you're even doing it. Okay, suspension. Standard are rubber bushings. Problem with these is they're very compliant. Also, the problem with these is they do this, they wear out. They break, they dry out, they crack, they fall apart. These actually are the upper control arms on a TR6, which are the upper inner A-arm connections. And when these wear out, then that lets that arm move back and forth, which causes the car to kind of do this down the road, kind of wanders around like a drunken sailor. So these become an issue with age. In addition, most of the cars came with a lever shock. And they are rebuildable, but I don't think anybody knows that you can put oil in them and do a few other things, but eventually the seals in there just wear out. And at some point you have to deal with it either by rebuilding it or replacing it with something else. So some of the really good upgrades for suspension are polyurethane parts. They don't crack, they don't dry out. They still wear, I guess in extreme cases, but they press it in the original places. They're far less compliant, so the car doesn't kind of steer itself because all these little bushings are able to wiggle around, and so it keeps the suspension parts where they belong. The car goes where you point it. There's a slight penalty, I'm sure, in ride quality, but I don't somehow think you'd actually notice it.
Mike, excuse me, quick question.
Yep.
With the polyurethane bushings, do you recommend lubing them?
Yes.
Okay.
I think the manufacturers recommend that, and I think you use a lithium grease because either way, once you put them together, you've still got some metal parts inside of metal parts, and you don't want them all rusting together because then they'll make some strange noises.
Okay.
And I think it also does help the assembly as well. Continuing. As far as shock absorbers, I'm going to replace that with tube shock conversion kits. There are plenty of those available. Once I go to a tube shock, then that allows me to use a standard old shock or upgrade to like an adjustable, like a Coney or a Spax. So it opens up a lot of different avenues for making improvements in ride quality.
Excuse me, how difficult is that on the TR3 on the rear, to do that on the rear? Because of where the shock is located.
That might be above my pay grade. I don't know if I have a good answer for that, but I can probably find out. How's that? Okay. And finally, in the suspension and handling department, you can certainly always upgrade to a thicker anti-roll bar or adding an anti-roll bar. You add a thicker, the idea of the anti-roll bar is it does, as its name implies, it prevents the car from leaning into a turn because of the torque you're applying to the bar is trying to resist that torque, and that keeps the car flat. Some cars only came with a front bar. Some cars originally had two bars, like the MGB came with had a rear bar, but they took it off as part of trying to get the car emissioned in '75, and I don't think it ever came back after that.
Yeah, they put it back on in
Did they?
'77, I think.
Yeah, well, things were coming to an end at that
Because
point.
it kept going like this.
Yeah, yeah. But you add a thicker bar at one end, that does improve the roll stiffness, helps the car corner flatter. Okay, cooling. Standard systems in pretty much any car, for the most part, are adequate.
Leaf spring.
But you will find that if you're sitting in traffic on a hot day and you're watching the temperature gauge, the traffic isn't moving, the temperature gauge just wants to inch up. I know in my youth I spent a lot of days in traffic in 80-degree weather with the windows open, the heater going full blast, just trying to keep the temperature gauge from going up there. Because I was sure bad things were going to happen when it did that. The other issue is that the older systems, depending on how well they've been maintained, can be full of all kinds of stuff. Rust, silt, corrosion products, old antifreeze, you name it, it can be in there. So certainly some of these old cooling systems could definitely benefit from an upgrade. So first off, one of the obvious ones is an aluminum radiator. Now, as part of putting this talk together, I did a little bit of research and I wanted to know why everybody touts aluminum as the way to go. As it turns out, if you looked at the coefficient of thermal conductivity, brass is the lowest. And they use brass in a lot of tanks and so on. Aluminum is about in the middle and copper is the best. Now, so if brass was 100, aluminum is 200, but copper was 400. But the idea is if I had a copper tank to be as strong as an aluminum tank, the copper tank would be twice as thick. So now I'm kind of going the wrong way as far as getting rid of heat. Also, aluminum is fairly cheap material, it's very easy to work with, and it's light. So that's probably the big thing when it comes to an aluminum radiator. But usually these kits do provide more capacity. As big a radiator as you can get into the space, and the more capacity, the more coolant I have to work with, the more coolant I have to carry the heat off, and the more surface area I have to get rid of that. So aluminum radiator actually has quite a bit going for it. I found mine in Summit Racing. I didn't have to go all over, but I found, certain things can be found in Summit Racing. And if you do a little bit of shopping, you can find what you're looking for in kind of strange places. Secondly,
Hey, Mike, while you're talking about that,
yeah,
we just did just food for thought. We, a couple of weeks ago, we just put that waterless antifreeze in a customer's TR6. And I don't have any feedback on it yet. It's, we rebuilt the engine, so the engine was totally dry, but we put the waterless in there. It was expensive. Seems to have worked. I don't have any feedback from the customer yet after we delivered the car, so I'm still waiting to hear back, but, that's how. I think it's like $40 a gallon, $45.
It only takes 2 gallons.
Well, that's true, thank God. You're not doing a tractor trailer. But $100. Yeah, but it seems to work well, but here again, I don't have a track record.
Man, what's the pros and cons of that? What are you gaining by doing that?
It's supposed to actually keep it cooler.
I think
There's no
boils
corrosion,
350 degrees.
as opposed to
So,
So I've used a water wetter in my PBR at one time, and made a huge difference. Huge.
There's no,
Yeah, the only thing doing with that is playing with surface
That's
tension.
what I'm thinking.
Right.
as well.
Evans waterless coolant is interesting because
Higher boiling point, low corrosion.
if your car went to 200 degrees or 220, you're not going to lose any out the overflow. It's not boiling, you're not creating those
Vapor
bubbles
bubbles.
and the hot spots and everything like that. So you could watch your temperature gauge go way high in traffic and know you're not losing any. And I think
That's the
the
trick.
engine components don't care very much.
Yeah, they don't care what
If
you
they're
do.
300 degrees.
Right.
You just don't want to lose water at
Right,
212.
well, that's the idea of going to a higher pressure cap, is you reduce those hot spots. You keep those hot spots.
The Evans is zero pressure.
I'm
It's
sorry?
required, the Evans coolant has a zero pressure system.
Okay, well,
Which is
right,
kind of
doesn't-
nice.
doesn't flash the
Because
steam.
those old heater hoses, under the dashboard aren't running 12 or 14 pounds.
Right.
Trying to keep the water thing down.
So it's more of a case probably of the heater core than it is the hose.
Okay, all right.
Because the
well,
hose, you'll get a little bit of expansion.
Okay, but the old core.
But the cores are just
I would
horrible.
recommend every 2 years.
Now, the question is, for me, is
Cars aren't
how
being
dry
driven,
does it have to
but
be
I still get the coolant.
to change it over?
My
Well,
stag out
to
there.
me, it would be very difficult to take a normal car
Get it,
and put waterless in it, because they specify that in directions.
how the hell do you get all the water?
Yeah.
There's a prep, there's a prep fluid you put in.
Just save it, find it here, and keep it from that.
Where does the antifreeze come into the picture? No more use of antifreeze, you use that when you're done.
Because the freezing temperature is 50.
What is it?
It's some glycol, it's some sort of.
Okay, here we go.
If they had antifreeze, you'd worry about having.
First cooling system upgrades otherwise. Hoses. hoses dry out, they crack, they stretch. The reinforcing inside of it breaks. Now you buy hoses that are Kevlar reinforced. In theory, they should last about forever.
You know, I don't think the rubber is the same as it was back in the day.
No, I don't think it is either. Something's changed, but I don't know what. Also, electric fans, these are great. They come in any kind of size, and they will move air like you won't believe. 2,200 cubic feet per minute, 3,000 cubic feet per minute. Depends on how much current you want to make available to that fan to drive, but you can cool off a really big engine real quick with a couple of those. In addition to thermostatic controllers, I would recommend one that's adjusted. So there's a little screw slot right in here, and normally there'd be a plug over top of that. But I can turn it and decide where on the temperature gauge do I want that fan to kick on. It's just a great way to buy a little security. Also, improve the airflow through the radiator. There's a green 250 in the other room that's got all kinds of ductwork in it, all kinds of stainless ductwork. And, you know, again, the idea is just to improve the airflow through the radiator, get the heat out of the radiator. For Stag and TR7 owners, I would strongly recommend the original 6-blade water pump to a 12-blade water pump. And the idea just to move more coolant faster.
Hey, Mike, is there ever an issue of possibly moving the water too fast?
Yeah, I'm sure there is. Mostly I think you'd see that if you're spinning the water pump too fast, it would cause cavitation behind the pump. Because as the water moves out of the way, you create a low pressure area right behind the fan, right behind that blade, and that pressure drop actually would cause the water to boil at that moment. It would flash the steam. So you'd have a little air pocket right behind there. So at some point the pump would become ineffective because it's just flashing the coolant to steam as opposed to pushing the water. I would imagine that you'd have to turn the pump pretty fast to make that happen.
Doesn't the thermostat regulate that also?
No, the thermostat's job is simply to regulate the temperature of the engine, and its job is when it opens.
But the thermostat does restrict the flow of coolant
Correct.
through the
The idea
engine.
being that it won't let the engine get below a minimum temperature.
Right. But sometimes take the thermostat out, the coolant passes through the radiator too quickly
Correct.
to lose the heat that it needs to.
But the problem is now you've let all the water flow through without any restriction, which means it's going to take forever for it to warm up. And you're going to have the drivability issues all that time. And there is really a minimum operating temperature the engine should have to run well and to run properly. If it's running too cold, especially a modern engine, effectively the engine management system will never get off of cold cycle, and the thing will fail emissions left and right because you took the thermostat out. But the older vehicles, really, you don't want to run too cold a thermostat because the engine needs a certain amount of heat to run well.
Like generally they have like 160,
Right.
180.
Yeah, you can go down to about 160. I've never seen a thermostat colder than 160. And a lot of cars actually today like 200. Especially if you want the heater to really work well. You want a 200-degree thermostat in your car. Okay, clutches and gearboxes. The standard transmission obviously is a 4-speed stick with an optional overdrive. It's been kind of found that these boxes are a tad light for longevity. And some of these broken parts here, gear teeth missing on this one. This gear is actually welded onto the main shaft. It's friction welded. I don't know what happened exactly, but those parts are basically might as well have been machined out of one billet because they're all together. This is an overdrive part with a big crack right through the middle of it. So, as you can see, the gearboxes do an okay job, but I virtually guarantee you, and I'm sure Matt can back this up, that your 4-speed is going to need a rebuild before 100,000 miles, almost guaranteed, no matter how gentle you are with it. So it's an adequate gearbox, but I couldn't give it much more than that. In addition, the overdrives can be a little bit iffy. I don't know how many overdrives we've had. Worked great when they were cold, stopped working when they got hot. Cool off, they work fine again. You change the solenoid, and that would solve the problem, or you had an issue with oil flow because they were dirty and not properly maintained, couldn't bring enough current to the solenoid to get it to fire properly, something along that line. So even the overdrives have issues. So some of the upgrades that we've seen is the fitment of the Toyota 5-speed. There's a guy out in California, Herman Vanderacker, does a conversion kit which puts a Toyota 5-speed pickup truck transmission and adapts it to Triumph engine. I can tell you from personal experience, I have a 2001 Toyota pickup truck, Tacoma, with a 5-speed in it. Nearly 300,000 on the clock. That gearbox shifts just as smooth today as the day they put it in. And there's no lost motion, there's no clunking, no banging, no worn bearings, no funny noises. It just works the way it's supposed to. Yes?
So how different does it feel versus the original transmission? Tactile sensation of the
I
gears?
think
It's pretty much about the same. But, you know, having driven a lot of TR6s, sometimes that stick just doesn't want to move. It feels really stiff, like they're stirring glue. The Toyota, boom, boom, nice. You push the clutch in, you push it where you want it to go, it gives you the gear you're looking for. Yes?
Yes, Mike, I've got one in my
Okay.
T6, and actually, I don't have the truck transmission in
Okay.
it. There's a certain range of
Yeah, there was a
cylinders in
range
there.
of vehicles.
And the first 4 gears are matched up virtually identical to the stock, and then you hit that fifth
And that
overdrive.
5th gear is your overdrive.
It's a great upgrade.
And you know, when you push it to 5, that gear is there.
You know, I think that the only drawback to that to me is that you have to put a stop on the clutch because the hydraulic throw-up bearing can
Yeah.
only move so
We'll
far.
push so far,
So,
to come apart.
What it does is it makes the length of the clutch half the distance. So you're used to having that long throw on the pedal, now you only have half of that throw. And sometimes, you know, to me, I kind of like that long throw because it lets you launch at different times if you had to. But that's more of a, you know, it launches a lot different than what you would be used to. But I guarantee, you know, I agree with him that it's a great deal, but it's just a little different.
Yeah. So it's like
A
anything.
little different drive, but it's just a clutch.
Yes.
just
I
a
put
clutch.
And
I
it's a
put an
little
Eagle
wonky
Gate,
with the drive shaft.
put an Eagle Gate conversion kit instead of the Herman Vanderacker.
Okay.
And that still uses the original slave cylinder, and it still uses the pressure plate from the TR and all that stuff, just a different clutch plate.
Right.
The only modification you had to do was, it comes with its own shifter, but you had to modify the transmission tunnel by a half an inch to the back, so you had to
Okay.
grind it out.
Okay, well, Herman's kit, you gotta play around with.
You gotta drive with all that stuff too, but it's a big difference.
Yeah.
the drive shaft.
And, yeah,
The drive shaft has to
usually
get
there's,
locked
they
down.
put a collar on the drive shaft because there's sliding.
Or
spline joints.
Eagle Gate sells a drive shaft for like 300 and some bucks, all ready to go, you know. You don't
The
have
collar's a little cheaper.
collar cheap.
I made up a lot of drive shafts for that conversion. You're saying the best drive shaft for that is one without a slider. Because the tail shaft of the transmission already has a slider in it, so you cannot have a slider, cannot have a
Two
drive
sliders.
shaft sliding.
Two sliders.
So you have to lock it in place. So now you've got a slider that's not being used and it's just a place for misalignment.
Plus, there's a lot of metal up in that area that you just added.
Right, it's best to make up a drive shaft without a slider, just go plan.
You're saying it's collar,
It's actually a split collar. You clamp it around the drive shaft where it would slide on the sliding joint. So you're using a sliding joint in the tail shaft of the transmission, not the sliding joint on the drive shaft. If I had 2 sliding shafts together, they'd actually eventually move away and they'd drop out.
The drive shaft's got to be short.
No, all Herm's kit's doing is locking in position.
Extending the drive shaft the whole way against and then putting the lock
Yeah,
collar
lock
on to
it,
keep
yeah.
it there. Thing is, the only thing that's holding it from extending further is the cork seal inside that ring that screws on.
But the drive shaft's shorter, right?
Not for
No,
the,
you're not
for
changing,
the
you don't have
neck
to change
and-
the drive shaft.
It's the same one.
You use,
Same drive
yeah.
shaft.
Oh, I would have thought you'd have to cut it. I
Nope.
would think the trans would be longer.
Yes.
No, I think the trans is a little shorter, actually, it must be.
Yes.
Could you touch on the reverse lockout for an A-type overdrive? Is it necessary, recommended? I believe it's an aftermarket situation.
No, I can't. That's again above my pay grade, but
Well, you know, as far as the overdrive goes, it definitely does not like to go in reverse in overdrive.
It's only made the turn one way.
There's an aftermarket lockout. I was wondering if that's a,
You know, I'm not familiar with it. Normally, if the gearbox is set up correctly, there's no issues with the cutout switch that's originally supposed to be there.
but is that in the early A-type and the J? I thought that was
It's
just
in all
J.
of them.
It's in all of them?
Yeah, the J doesn't like going in reverse either. So, but if everything is set up correctly, those cutout switches work fine. So there's no reason to.
Add another safety.
Correct.
It's very easy to leave the overdrive switch on in park, and then if you go to back up, you're in big trouble.
Maybe just go the light and then you go to the light.
Yes.
But the electric overdrive, the wire won't work in first or
We've got a Sprite out there right now. No, I don't know if they make one for, I don't know what they make. Herman Bender, HBDA. He's out in California. All right. Also, some other things you can do to improve the transmission is to lighten the flywheel. Especially the TR6, that flywheel's that big and it's that thick, that's why it weighs a ton. You drop it on your foot, you're gonna know it. So one of the things is you go to either aluminum or just have the iron on lights a little bit. Usually what you're gaining there is a little better throttle response because you're not spinning that giant hunk of metal up. Gives the engine a little more pep. Also with the Triumph transmissions, at least, you can adjust the fulcrum point on the throwout bearing. You notice there's an arm about that long with 3 holes in it. The top hole, you have the shortest lever pushing against the throwout bearing, so the clutch is the heaviest. And the bottom hole, you have the longest lever, so the clutch is quite a bit lighter. It's still kind of heavy, but it's quite a bit lighter. And even in the midpoint, it still leaves you, the clutch still has a lot of weight to it, but putting it at the bottom at least will make it a little bit easier to drive. Also, there are companies, I'm sure, which can adapt an automatic transmission, but note that there's usually a slight upcharge because there's a lot of engineering work involved. But I have actually heard of it. Somebody at one time adapted a Ford 3-speed out of a Pinto to fit into an MG because the owners were getting so old. They wanted to still enjoy their car, but they didn't want all the effort of driving.
The transmissions and overdrive, what do you recommend for lubrication? Straight 30 weight, engine oil with the overdrive?
Ask the boss. I'm not qualified in that area. Electrical issues I can tell you instantly, but some of the mechanical things, some of the detailed mechanical things will be on. Okay, so that's about it. Rear axles. This is a typical rear axle for a TR6 or any of the independent rear suspension cars. And as you can see, I got 2 U-joints and a sliding spline in here. All of these parts are prone to wear. When a U-joint starts wear, what you'll hear is a click every time you engage the clutch, especially from going from forward to reverse, or if you're a little sharp with the clutch and it hooks up real hard, you actually hear a mechanical or a metallic clicking sound. That's actually the U-joints kind of slamming into each other. It's not going to be too much longer before that click becomes a clunk, and then the bearing cups start to fall out. So that's one issue. Secondly is the sliding spline joint is prone to wear, has to be lubricated at a fairly regular interval with a particular type of grease. The way you notice this is becoming an issue is you're going around a turn under power, and the 2 parts actually lock momentarily, and then when you load the tire enough, they pop, and that gives you the classic twitch as you're going around a turn. So when you feel that, you know that spline locked momentarily and then released suddenly. And it causes a camber change in the rear wheel, and the car does a little sidestep. It's kind of hard to drive a car smoothly when it wants to do that all the time.
What grease do you recommend?
There's a synthetic lube that they are offering up as a solution. I don't remember specifically what it is, but it really the factory even issued a service bulletin concerning it, so that information is available. And finally, at least as far as the TR5 and 6 are concerned, and I guess the 4A, is the differential actually hangs from the frame on 4 pins. And if the bushings start to wear out, that differential starts to move around and actually will tear the bushing apart. And now there's nothing to control the motion of that differential assembly. And you'll hear a really loud clunk every time the clutch takes up. And that's actually the differential slamming into the frame. And that's not going to last very long before you tear them out. That's a common failure. So upgrades for that. Number one, poly bushings. They don't break, they don't tear apart. And because they lack that compliance, they'll tend to hold that differential in place much better. That eliminates the shock load, eliminates the noise, reduces possible frame damage. One of the other things that's been offered up is there are all kinds of specialist companies which sell various parts for all these cars. And one of the big upgrades in the TR6 at least is a BMW rear axle that uses their differential and CV joints instead of sliding splines and U-joints. I'm sure they get a little, quite a price for that, but it does reduce all of this and uses more modern components and a much better way to do the job. Okay, fuel systems. We're all familiar with the great things about Zenith and SU carburetors, but frankly, they really aren't that bad for standard street work. But their issues are, frankly, even our newest car is over 30 years old at this point. So the packing in the carburetor can leak, dries out, and the last thing you want is actual raw fuel puddling on the engine because you all know what happens next. And the other thing is that the moving parts in the carburetor, the spindles and the throttle plates can wear, the bushings wear out, or they mechanically interfere with each other, and the seals can go. So what you create are air leaks, which gives you lean operation, kind of rough running, a car that's not particularly interested in running without a lot of choke on it. So those are issues with carburetors. And then I'm sure everybody has a horror story too about SU electric fuel pumps and the mechanical points that are in those. So upgrades there, I can certainly replace them with rebuilt units. Everybody likes their Weber carburetors, frankly. I've never seen one I particularly liked. But there are also, Mikuni makes basically what is a motorcycle carburetor, which works okay, but each upgrade there brings its own issues. Or there's Solex and several other different manufacturers of carburetors, so you can certainly change out carburation to something either a little more modern or a little different that might be easier to work with. There are fuel injection kits available if you really wanted to go crazy. Moss used to sell, but from what I was researching in the last couple of weeks, I guess they discontinued it. But they sold basically a rudimentary throttle body fuel injection for the MGB. So you took the single barrel Zenith carburetor off and fitted their kit. And they did it to try to get cars through emissions in California. But customers were fitting them because they said the cars drove better, they ran a little bit cooler, and they were much more tractable. So you eliminated all the issues with carburation and went to the simple fuel injection system. There are other companies that make them. Megasquirt is one, but from what I've read, they just build a controller. You've got to bring your own injection nozzles, fuel pump, and plumbing and so on to make that happen. But in the end, what you end up with is a car that's, again, a little more tractable because it's now fuel injection, not carbureted. You eliminate the hot soak issue, which is where I pull up to the Dairy Queen in a 90-degree day, I turn the engine off, and 10 minutes later I go to start it again, and there's no fuel in the carburetors because it's completely boiled out, and the engine is effectively flooded with vapor because it had to go somewhere. So those kits are great for eliminating that. And then as far as the fuel pumps are concerned, I can always go to, or you can always upgrade to a solid state control in the fuel pump. They retain their classic ticking noise, but instead of using set of points, they use a transistor. There's a company in England called Holden, among others, which sold a kit. I really wanted to get one, but apparently it's no longer available, but you can buy the whole fuel pump that way, at least being a solid state type.
Hey, Mike, there was a
Yes.
question about what oil in an overdrive.
Yes.
I know, I guess, Mike Wolf was talking about John Esposito up in Connecticut or wherever his shop is. He does a lot of transmission rebuilding. I'm actually the opposite, because to me, if you look in the workshop manual, maybe Ken could chime up on this too, but if you look in a workshop manual, it doesn't matter whether it's a Jaguar, Austin Healey, MGB, they basically all have the same overdrive. It might be a D, a J, an A, or
They're all made by
whatever.
the same guy.
But the bottom line is, MGB may call for 30 weight, Triumph may call for 80W90. Personally, I see nothing other than synthetic oil is different, and I don't recommend synthetic oil for an overdrive, even though oil is kind of like an opinion, and everybody has one. But to me, an 80W90 GL4 is probably the best oil that you could put in there. And we don't drive our cars, and even if you do drive your car hard, and he might have been talking about some kind of pressure, but in my mind, the the 80W90, and maybe Rich can chime in too, but the 80W90 is, to me, is a great overall oil. I haven't experienced any problems with it, and that's what I put in everything that leaves here. So I don't follow that, but it just, yeah, GL4 won't attack the brass, but I mean, sometimes it's hard to find the GL4. They'll try to sell you GL5 or GL3 or whatever. I don't keep track of it, but the GL4 tends to work very well. So, you almost, other than synthetic, you really can't go wrong.
All right.
About
Continuing.
Sorry to interrupt.
That's all right. Electrical. We've all had issues with discharge batteries. We're watching the ammeter go to full on and the lights are still dim. The standard is a Lucas alternator or generator. Now, I'm a little more familiar with the alternator, so I'll discuss those a little bit further. But basically, I had 4 flavors for an alternator. And to know which one you've got, check on your alternator. This bolt is what holds the diode bridge assembly in place. There should be a little tag trapped underneath that nut. And that will tell you what type of alternator you have. The 15 ACR alternator was good for 28 amps. Could they spare it? The 16 ACR was 34, some improvement. 17 ACR is 36, again, why bother? And the 18 ACR was good for 45. Now, any one of these can be substituted with an 18 ACR with maybe one wire has to be added because the sense wire is not built in to an 18 ACR. You have to bring it up separately. But other than that, they all use exactly the same mounting, the same body size, all the same internal components. So I could upgrade from a 15 ACR to a 40 to an 18 in one step, and at least get that out of it. But as it would come out of the factory, there's very little room for expansion because the alternators are basically designed to supply only what is needed. So if I wanted to go adding a big radio system or extra driving lights or some other items like that, I'm going to run into a big problem. I'm simply not going to have enough power. I'm going to have a rundown battery before too much longer. Electrical harnesses also tend to be a tad light. Using an 18 gauge wire to supply headlight power, I think, is a little ludicrous. They're asking an awful lot of that piece of wire. You certainly wouldn't be allowed to build a house like that. So electrical harnesses tend to be a bit light. They're also asking the switches to do all the work. So when I turn on the headlight switch on high beam, all the power to run the high beam is going through the switch first, which is why Lucas switches tend to fall apart, or when you take them apart and they got any kind of age on them, they actually they're physically melted sections in the switches.
Hey, Mike,
So-
did you want to just touch on if somebody does put like 100 amp in there, 100 whatever? that maybe they should lead some of the, like, take a wire right to the battery so they don't, or did I?
Well, yeah, we'll
Or did I cut in front of you?
we'll talk about that.
Okay, sorry.
That's okay. So anyway.
You can digress.
Okay. So as far as upgrades are concerned, I can certainly upgrade the alternator to something a little bit more powerful within the same chassis. Or if I wanted to go all out and make sure that I can drive anything and the car next to me and the car next to him. This is a GM unit. It's 100 amps, it says. Now, no alternator will deliver 100 amps at idle, but the capability of having 100 amps at 2,000 RPMs, man, that goes a long way. And these units are clockable insofar as I take these 4 bolts out, I can rotate this back body. So I can clock it any way I want. I can put this is the output screw, right? This is the output of the alternator right there, single wire. I can put that in any one of 4 positions. Note, if you pull this off and put it back on, you will destroy the brushes. Because the brushes, unlike a Lucas alternator, which come in from the back, these come in on the side. So when you pull it out, the springs unload, they pop into position, and when you push the housing back in, you snap the brushes right off. However, they only cost about $12.
I just did that.
There you go. I did it too, that's why I know.
Sounds like you.
But anyway, yes. Actually, there's a place where you pull brushes out. You just release them, and then you assemble it and push them back in. I didn't know that at the time. So, but if you change the clocking, you just undo the 4 bolts, rotate it, put the bolts back in. Don't pull it apart, because that's when you're running into problems. But you upgrade to 100, or I think even General Motors makes 150. Delco makes 150 amps on this size unit. And for at least the TR6 6-cylinder, I may have to do a very tiny amount of grinding on a boss that's part of the bracket, but it goes right on the car. And it hooks right up to it.
How about for the 3 and the 4?
We sell a kit. Sorry.
That's okay. That's it.
Advertisement.
Sell all you want.
We sell a kit, which is everything you need, including instructions. And I know that because I helped write the instructions.
Well, now you have something to add to it.
Yeah. Okay, I didn't think about that. So yeah, I can change the Lucas unit. This also would be a good idea to add some extra fuses. You know, the 2s and 3s and early 4s and a lot of the other British cars only have all the 2 fuses. So nothing wrong with adding another fuse box, and I can, however many of these I want to chain together. And they take a modern spade type fuse, which, by the way, you can also buy that has an LED indicator in them, that when the fuse blows, the LED is lit. So now you're not poking around with a dark fuse box trying to find which one's open. It's already telling you which one's open. That's pretty slick. So extra fuses and also adding relays to drive certain loads takes the stress off the switches. So if I upgraded my headlights above say 65 watts for high beam, maybe adding a set of relays to drive them would be a good idea. You also notice that the headlights are brighter because I took the load out of the switch. The switch no longer starts to act like a resistor. So the headlights are brighter and all the other associated loading is brighter as well. So there's a lot to be said for adding a couple of relays. They're fairly simple to put in.
I actually put relays on my 71 TR6, the lights were so dim, I measured the voltage actually getting to the headlights was 9 volts.
Yeah.
Instead of the, 13 or 14.
And that's all dropped pretty much through the switches.
Yeah, and the wiring is too light. You mentioned the 18 gauge wiring. I put a relay system in and got full 12 volts to the light. You wouldn't believe how bright those lights are.
What's the difference?
My favorite car to drive in the dark.
So, also, if you want to add power accessories and that sort of thing, like radios or a CB radio, for example, if you're traveling with a convoy, or sat-nav systems and so on, always want to, adding extra fuses gives you nice places to take off power that you need. Also, cars equipped with alternators use, it's called a voltage stabilizer. It's used to set a reference voltage in the temperature gauge and the fuel gauge. The original ones are mechanical. They work kind of like a turn signal flasher. The new ones are solid state. If you've got I just filled the tank up, but the wretched gauge only reads halfway. It's because this is failing. It's only actually putting out half the voltage you need. So an upgrade there would be just go to solid state type. And you've eliminated basically something with a set of points that can burn out. Okay, engines. we can have fun with engines. But 4 6s and 8s, obviously, they weren't particularly overly developed. They didn't make a ton of horsepower for their size. Rugged, tough motors that are hard to kill, but by the same token, they lacked all the development. So, I mean, the sky's the limit. How big is your wallet? You can go to town on this. But first thing I would do, and I'm not getting paid for selling for Pertronics, but I do like this kit. It goes right into the distributor, 2 wires, right across the coil, you're done. And it eliminates the points. It eliminates the points bounce. And this kit actually will pay for itself, because if you have a car that absolutely positively will not run on anything less than premium fuel because it pings like you won't believe, you put this in, run on mid-grade, and it might knock slightly under full load. And all I did was eliminate the points bounce. That's what this is great for. So now I'm not paying $3.50 a gallon for gas. I'm paying $2.75. Goes a long way. And those kits are only $60 or $70 will get you into one of those.
Is that adaptable for the 3 as well?
Yep. And they make positive and a negative ground type as well. So I can go either way. Fuel injection, as I've already mentioned. Silicon gaskets. There's a set down there. I stumbled onto these. Cork gaskets dry out after a while. They crack, they shrink, they compress to the point where they don't really seal, and they weep after a while, so they become a maintenance issue. Silicon gaskets are designed to tolerate higher temperatures. You basically glue them into the gasket track on one side, and so that it makes them nicely reusable. They seal very well, and they just eliminate the problem of that old technology. And finally, we can always go to forced induction. Moss Motors sells supercharger kits for MG and Triumph. The 50 horsepower just leaps out of the engine, assuming I got an engine that's up to the task. There's a 4-cylinder Austin block sitting over there out next to the arbor press. We're going to force feed that engine when it's all said and done. It's being rebuilt so it can tolerate the stresses of running forced induction. But again, how big is your wallet? Okay, and finally, safety, comfort, and convenience. Driving position becomes a real issue. So seats, driving position, these cars, they're fun to drive, but they're drafty in the winter. They're always cold. In the summer, they cook you. They're noisy because they lack sound insulation. So you always hear road noise, engine differential, and gearbox noises. The stock audio system, if it even has one, is an AM radio or an AM FM. So again, here the sky's the limit. We can do just about anything we want. It just depends on how big our wallet is. But I can get an air conditioning kit for pretty much anything I want. There's a Pimento red TR6 parked out there that has a hard top on it, got the weather, and an air conditioning kit to keep the cold air in. I'm sure that's a pretty nice setup. But a company is called Retro Air. They make air conditioning kits for classic cars. I know for a fact that you can still buy the compressors, the original compressors that were used. They may not say York on them, but they sure look like a York compressor to me, because I just bought one a year ago for my Stag.
We put an air conditioner in that Renown we did a few years ago. So if you can put an air conditioner in a Renown, you can pretty much, I don't know why you'd want to do that, because the car isn't fast enough to put the air conditioner on.
Suddenly it's all done to driving the air conditioner.
Unless you're going downhill, everything's fine.
But the point of it is that you can buy all the parts you need off the shelf. All you need is to know how to pull them all together. Radios, HD radio, satellite radio. You can get a radio now that has USB ports, iPod connections, CD players, tape decks. If you want it, you can get it in a radio. I mean, they're not horribly expensive. And once you add some sound deadening, this is a foam, it's an acoustic foam with a sticky back, or this stuff, which is basically what could almost be called tar with a reflective coating on it. The idea of this is this puts gives the metal a little more density, it reduces the oil drumming effect, so it doesn't become a speaker for every little noise that comes in on one side of it. So this deadens the sound, this as much absorbs it as anything else. Makes the car a little bit quieter, makes it a little bit cooler, and it insulates you, like I said, insulates you from the heat source. Hard tops, of course, most cars were available. You could get a factory hard top, or a hard top is an option. So there are plenty of hard tops out there. One of the things that the blogosphere talks about is fitting a set of Miata seats to a TR6 or to any one of the cars that will fit in. I couldn't tell you how good or bad that works. Sounds like a neat idea. Certainly, it's more seat for your as a headrest, so that should that emotionally challenged teenage girl who's busy with her cell phone run into the back of you, at least you have half a chance of not suffering from whiplash. And of course, you know, if you know an interior guy, he can dress them in a matching color that matches the car as it is. Center armrests and consoles. There's one right there in a magazine. I think Moss sells them as well. It just gives you a place to lean, a little bit more comfort instead of that big hole in this between the two seats. And some storage space as well.
Hey, Mike.
Yes.
I wanted to leave Rich enough time to.
Okay, I'm done in like two.
Two?
Two.
One? Two.
This is an upgrade everybody should think about, because at least 3 people in this room can speak from personal experience why you should have one of these in your car. 2 of those people are the people who put out the fire that happens, and one who suffered the fire. You really should have one of these. These are, they've done away with halon because it's not environmentally friendly, but this is halotron, which is a similar material. It's just clean room, this is for use in a clean room, like in a computer room. Doesn't leave any residue, puts out the fire quickly, and you know, saves you from watching your pride and joy burn to the ground right in front of you.
Where should that be mounted?
I don't know, I think I got this from Summit Racing. They come in red, black, and chrome, all kinds of sizes. And, you know, VTR doesn't take off for these in the car, by the way. In fact, if a judge takes off that you've got a fire extinguisher in your car, talk to him and beat him over the head with it, because this is considered, VTR at least considers this protecting your investment. You're allowed to have one of these in your car. Doesn't matter how original or perfect your car is, if it has a fire extinguisher in it, they are not allowed to take off for it, unless it's just thrown in the car.
They will ban you for an emergency hood release, though.
I can't say that. If I don't see it, I don't. How's the expression go? If I don't see it, I can't write a ticket for it. Something like that. Okay, I'm done. I'll turn it over to Mr.
Mike.
Good. Yes.
Yeah. Where's the best place to mount that?
Should be within arm's reach.
Within arm's reach, if I may offer. I stole an idea from Mercedes-Benz, and I'll get that freely. They mounted this right in the driver's seat, right in front of the driver's seat, which means you would grab that on the way out the car, right in front of the seat. And I worked out a mounting on TR6 that mounted it. It was just a strip of metal, and it mounted to the seat pivot points. Same thing. Clip, go. Okay, thank you.